Let me introduce you all to the resource speaker for today. Madam Geetha Gopi N is a rehabilitation practitioner and psychologist, and she is the professional director of Sahashaktikaran Trust, Kochi, with over 30 years of experience in helping children with special needs. She's worked in international schools following an American curriculum for inclusive settings primarily for more than 15 years. She's done intensive work in curriculum development, adaptation, behavioral management, coordinating and promoting best educational practices using UDL principles among staff and parents. She's also launched Early Academic Series, a teacher's kit for teaching early English language skills and basic mathematics based on universal design of learning. Who better than her to orient us about the milestones and the requisite for English language development? It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, ma'am. Before I hand over the podium to you, I'd like to share with all our participants today that the session would be for 2 hours. The session would begin with a presentation by the resource speaker, followed by a Q&A segment. During the resource speaker sharing, we'd be switching the chat to the host and the panelist mode so that we can all focus on the resource speaker sharing. Wish you all a happy learning. Geetha ma'am, do I have you with me? Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening. Okay, without much ado, I think I'll straight away get into today's workshop, and thank you for the platform ability. Looking forward to having another great session with all the participants. So shall I go to screen share?
Yes, please, ma'am.
It's visible, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, today's workshop, good evening to all the participants, and today's workshop is on milestones and prerequisites for English language development, the various strategies and techniques that we employ to teach English to children with special needs. A quick recap through what was done in the previous workshop. We had concentrated on the various cognitive skills, the core cognitive processes that are required for learning, that is attention, perception, thinking, and memory. The importance of cognitive skill development in academic learning and academic performance output, the various challenges that special needs children face in terms of cognitive processing and cognitive skill development. And then we also had a look at the different strategies and techniques that can be employed. Also, some of the activities that can be employed to improve cognitive skills and cognitive processing in children with special needs. So this today's workshop is one further down the aisle. It talks about language development and the importance of language development, the different stages in speech and language development, what are the hurdles or barriers and challenges that are faced by children with special needs, particularly in the area of speech and language, and then strategies and techniques to develop English language skills. Especially a lot of our special needs children nowadays, with inclusive education coming to the forefront, a lot of them are attending English medium schools. And so therefore it becomes imperative to address these issues. So to start off with, what is language? It is a formal system that is used for the purpose of communication. Communication means that you are transmitting information from one person to another and reciprocate. And it just doesn't include oral expressions. It includes speech, of course, which is the most predominant way of communicating. But it also includes, sounds, signs, like you can have a signal going off, or picture signs, symbols, body language, gestures. All these contribute to and is a part of the total communicative process. So it includes, total communication actually includes both verbal and non-verbal information, or both verbal and non-verbal modes of transmitting information. So when we look at the core aspects of communication, why are we communicating? Basically, the intent of communication is to receive and transmit information or messages. It could be thoughts, ideas, or your emotions from one person to another, or sometimes from one person to a group, depending on who the receiver and who the senders are. And again, as I mentioned, they are usually done with a combination of both verbal and non-verbal means of communication. Types of language development, two major areas in which communication develops, language development takes place. One is known as receptive language. That is, we receive, understand information from the world around us, from other people, from signboards, from whatever we get through our sensory modalities. So receiving that information, and that is known as receptive language, and making sense of it. Expressive language is the other cornerstone of language development. That is being able to express your needs, your wants, how you feel, your ideas on something, being able to communicate with another person, hold conversation till for a required length of time, etc. So both the major pillars of language development is receptive as well as expressive language. So when we look at development of language, it does some amount of language acquisition in various forms do take place prenatally. Research is pointing more and more towards that. But for all practical purposes, most of the language development takes place in early childhood. And particularly the biggest spurt of language development, or the biggest boost to language development, or the most, the fastest mode of language development takes place between birth to 5 to 6 years of age. So it is a very, very crucial period, early childhood and probably early schooling. So that is the time when language development takes place in all children. And with children with special needs, definitely, you can expect it to, go further. So in this early childhood phase, it is important that we learn to understand what others are speaking. We learn how to express our thoughts and wants, etc., and how to use language effectively. And for this, there are two very, very important skills that kind of encompasses, or is actually the front phase of language development, which is speaking and listening. And speaking and listening are very, very vital to language development, because this not only is part of speech and language development as such, but it paves way, or is it facilitates or triggers the pathway to literacy and numeracy skill development, which forms the basis of academic learning. That is, to be able to read, to write, and to do math. So early schooling years are also heavily dependent upon good holistic speech and language development, out of which speaking and listening are two very, very important skills that need a lot of attention. To understand a little bit about language development, language development doesn't happen in isolation. It actually happens as part of a regular child development in all other domains. So, while the earliest form of development takes place in the form of sensory motor skills, and then social skills, cognitive skills. All these things, while it is happening, concurrently at the same time, speech and language development also happens. So again, this has to be viewed as a part of a very important part of a total child development process. Cognitive processes are very much involved in the development of language. It helps us to not only acquire the required kind of skills, to be able to, to listen, to process information, to reciprocate. All this involves certain amount of cognitive processes, which we have talked about in our earlier workshops. So all those cognitive processes facilitate the ultimate applicability of using language in required communicative situations, which is known as the pragmatic use of language. So the pragmatic use is the ultimate goal of language development. It is where you use those language skills actively in a given situation. So what do we really have to have when we talk about prerequisites for language development? As I said earlier, language development doesn't happen in a silo or, just by itself in a silo. So it happens along with development in all the other areas. So healthy development in the other areas, which includes gross and fine motor skills, social skill development, cognitive skill development, is all necessary to go side by side so that healthy speech and language development can also take place. Sensory motor development is the earliest or the foundational skills development that lays that forms the basis for all other skill developments and all other domain developments. And sensory motor is basically, as the name suggests, it's taking in information through all your sense organs and then processing it and translating that into motor responses. Could be gross motor, like you have the major motor milestones such as holding the head, looking towards an object, being able to reach out for objects, grasp objects, etc. Finally, it comes to more complicated motor skills such as standing, walking, sitting, running, etc. So similarly, sensory motor also lays the foundation for triggers speech and language skill development simultaneously. And as is very characteristic of early childhood developments, play is an important process or an important part, a very important activity in which holistic skill developments take place in early childhood, because play actually incorporates a lot of these skills together. If you take any kind of game, most games or most play activities that children engage in, right from when they are, from newborns on to especially the early schooling years, right from there, there are different stages of play that develops. It starts with as basic as, looking at the mother and, starting to recognize the mother, and from a social smile on to more complicated skills. So it involves a lot of thinking processes, which facilitates cognitive skill development. It involves gross and fine motor skills as well, which facilitates the physical development part of it. It also requires interacting with other kids or peer group, which facilitates social skill development. So when all these things happen simultaneously, obviously language development also takes place. And that is why play is such an important part, or it plays a very, very important medium through which language development takes place. So coming to looking at the different kinds of milestones that happens and how language develops from birth to 5 years. 0 to 3 months, it's a newborn baby. We see a lot of different ways in which the child starts responding or tries to, and many of these you cannot kind of delineate and say, okay, this is only language development. Many of these responses or the skills that you see children performing are a combination of social skills, sensory motor, language, and everything. But what I've listed out is something that has a direct bearing on actual language development. So what the children do is 0 to 3 months, they start smiling in response to a familiar sound or a familiar voice. Especially you find the primary caregiver or the mother's voice. After a while, they start turning their head towards the direction where the sound or the familiar voice is coming. They start showing an interest in, faces, especially those who they interact with. Again, the mother or immediate family members starts making eye contact, looking into the other person's eyes. All this forms the basis of, social interaction. Differentiated cry, one of the first expressive forms of, expressive language, comes in the form of what is known as differentiated cry. That is, the cry is slightly different for different needs. So and usually mothers are pretty, or the primary caregivers are pretty perceptive to this. That when the child cries, there is a certain kind of cry. That when the child is hungry or when the child is in pain, it's a different kind of cry, and so on. So there are, this is one of the earliest forms of expressive communication. As we go further down, the child starts cooing. Cooing is, happy noises that the child makes when the child sees a familiar face, or if the mother or the primary caregiver is talking to them. Starts giving a social smile, like not just smiling irrelevantly, but seeing a familiar person and giving a smile in response to seeing that familiar person. So again, the basis of language and social interaction and language starts here. 4 to 6 months, they start reacting to sudden noises like startles, and if the environment was calm and there's a sudden noise or some unfamiliar voices come, they start being perceptive to that. Listens and responds when you speak to them. So even if the baby is just 4 to 6 months, when you're speaking to them, they're actually intently listening to you and trying to make sense of what you're saying. And slowly they start using consonant sounds, and usually things like dada, mama, baba kind of sounds, repetitive sounds, which we call as babbling stage. At this stage, they're not really, they don't have a communicative intent, in the sense it's not word-like, but it's more like repetitive. They're exploring sounds, the production of different kinds of sounds through repetition. Children also use different kinds of sounds to express different kinds of feelings. So it becomes what was earlier differentiated cry, that becomes more fine-tuned to making different kinds of sounds to express different kinds of feelings. They also notice that the things that they manipulate, like toys, or the things that they use, hold, grasp, can make noise or doesn't make a noise. Sometimes you find children at this age trying to grab any toy and trying to shake it or bang it in the hope that there might be some noise, because earlier maybe they've had rattles and things like that, which were sound making toys. Using babbling to gain attention. If this is very common when adults are speaking to each other, and if the child really wants to gain attention, sometimes you do find babies increasing their babbling, both in volume as well as in the speed or the kind of babbling they do, to gain the attention of the adult. So different ways of how receptive and expressive language and social interaction all intertwined is developing through these early years, early months of child development. Children between 7 to 9 months use an increased variety of sounds and syllables and different sound combinations, which is termed babbling. And usually the ma, ba, these are the sounds quite often used by children. So they may not be actually verbalizing words as such, but they may look or identify familiar objects and people when names. For example, if you ask, where's mama? They might look at them, and or where's, if you're serving, say you're getting the milk bottle ready. If you mention the word for milk, they might look for the milk bottle. So being able to identify that word that is spoken by someone else to the object. So again, here, receptive language is developing. Recognizing, responding to when you call their name. So again, that is another way, understanding that that name belongs to them and therefore they are being called. Participates in a two-way communication. Again, here they may not be speaking words, but you can have a kind of baby talk. People can talk to the children and the children start responding quite often with expressive intonations in their babbling sounds. They can follow some routine commands. Sometimes you ask them to clap or, show something. They do things like this, trying to imitate some of the sounds you produce, trying to imitate some of the actions. If you say bye, they can kind of, not a very refined, but probably they still can, kind of show a waving when it is necessary, or shaking or pushing away to show that they do not want to show negative responses. So a lot of these things develop during 7 to 9 months. 9 to 12 months, they try imitating actual speech sounds, and a few words, actual first words, start appearing. And the words may not be very refined. For example, they may use the word mama for mother. They may also use mama for a grandmother. These, but more generic kind of first words relating to immediate people in their environment, immediate objects that they are more prone to using. Those kind of things start developing. If you give simple instructions like come here, even when they are in the crawling stage, if you ask them to come, they will come crawling towards you. Or, if you say stop, they can kind of stop. So they start understanding basic, simple instructions. Common items, if you give it by name, they're able to look towards it or bring it. Turns and looks towards the direction of sounds. This is again very commonly seen when you see children walking with support or crawling, and suddenly there's a noise in some other direction. They will stop and turn around and probably go towards that or look around to see where it is coming from. So all this happens as part of language development. 12 to 18 months, that is almost 1 to 1.5 years of age. By this time, children can actually, recognize names of familiar people within the family or familiar others in the family. Common objects that they, constantly encounter in their environment, identify their own body parts or body parts of other people. They can follow simple directions, and they can understand simple body gestures as well. A limited vocabulary, about 8 to 10 words, about 15-20 words can appear by this time. 18 to 24 months, which is like 1.5 to 2 years, it becomes again language development. Both the receptive as well as expressive gets a bit more sophistication. So then instead of just one word utterances, they start joining 2 words to mean, to communicate more effectively what they want to say. Or they even understand these kind of phrases. So 2-word phrases are very predominant during this time. They may also use 2-word phrases, not just to say something, but also ask questions. Again, like sometimes children just say, Papa, come, and they may make Papa, come can be said as a statement, as a matter of fact, to indicate, okay, Papa has come. Papa, come in a question-like form, in a question tone, can also be done by children to indicate, has Papa come? They don't have that finesse of that expansive vocabulary, but just through voice intonations, they begin to convey questions or, answers and statements. They begin to understand simple commands, understand simple questions. So when you ask, they're able to respond accordingly. And by this time, the vocabulary has developed fairly well, almost to up to 50 words. And then 24 to 36 months, that is 2 years to 3 years of age, a lot of the prepositional concepts, like the spatial concepts, such as in the box or on the table, or, behind or in the front, in the back, all these kind of prepositional spatial concept words, they start understanding and using some of these. They can use I, me, her, him, and those kind of he, she kind of concepts. They can also use adjective kind of words, such as, happy or crying or painful, big, small, and kind of things. Uh, a speech becomes more and more refined, and because they have a much bigger vocabulary at this time, they're able to communicate more accurately what they need. um, uh, Strangers would be able to understand most of what is said, but sometimes not all of it, because sometimes some of these words also may not be real adult words that they use. They may be approximations. So may not be able to understand all of it, but a good part of it can be understood even by strangers. They even begin to ask simple questions. So, this is again a very, very crucial requirement, because then they can ask to to get more clarification on what somebody is saying. So again, or to gain more information about something. So begins to ask simple questions, speaks in 2 or 3 word phrases, a little small basic sentences start developing. They can also use questions. Begin to also use simple plurals, like adding an s, saying if they know it's not just one, it's more than one, they start asking, they start using simple plural words as well. Sometimes some basic past tense verbs can be also seen in children's utterances at this time. 36 to 48 months. Here, there's again a big spurt from the 3 word sentence, basic sentence utterances. Now the sentences get longer. The length of sentences increases, the complexity of the sentences increases, the kind of vocabulary they use, the words they use become more and more refined, more accurate. So they are able to relate their experiences. If you ask, okay, if you went out during the week and what did you do, they're able to kind of relate their experiences, be able to tell a small story. And even make up stories at this stage. Many of the children do even say make up stories, from either from what they picked up from the media, or from somebody who's read stories to them, and then they concoct their own as well. And then 48 to 60 months, which is 4 years to 5 years, when fluency really develops, they start speaking at a much faster rate. The sentence length has increased from what it used to be. They're able to use a lot of the past tenses, adjectives, nouns, verbs in an accurate manner. The vocabulary really goes through a big spurt. It jumps up, from what was 1,000 in the previous stage to almost 1,500. And when it comes to listening and following directions, from simple directions, 1 or 2 step, even multi-step directions, they're able to follow. So you see from the first 5 years, see such a big change in the way receptive and expressive language develops in children. And this helps us to understand what a big, complicated yet important process that is, which contributes towards overall child development. A study conducted by Oxford University in 2018. This was, looking into early schooling and language and the connection it has between language development. What they found out was 50% of children starting school do have delayed development in language and communication skills. Children, especially from disadvantaged or lower socioeconomic backgrounds, were more prone to having delays or in language development. And early language stimulation, exposure to early language activities through parents, through teachers, or through significant others in their environment are very vital and crucial for developing language and literacy skills, which forms a good basis for future academic learning and early schooling. And the research study also touched upon that at least 25% of students in the primary school level were not able to read according to their grade level and probably have had a history of delayed language or not inadequate language and communication skill development. So what, having understood, what normal child development or a neurotypical child, speech and language level looks like, and how important it is in the process of overall child development. I would really like to open it up to the participants to come up with, what do they think are the difficulties, the challenges, or the barriers that a lot of children who we classify as special needs face, and what are the impact that it has on language development.
So Ms. Goma says pronunciation problems, delayed speech, ASL, fewer words acquired, comprehension issues, poor articulation, not able to comprehend, speech clarity, learning to read, pronunciation problems, less interest, mirror letters, writing issues, difficulty to greet, start a conversation, very few sentences in a word, very few words in a sentence, unable to read, forget spelling mistakes, behavioral issues, articulation problem, omissions, speech and language disorders, speech delays, fluency disorders, writing problem.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of these, people have mentioned a lot of the problems, but what I see mostly is people have touched more upon expressive language problems. A lot of the, receptive language problems have, because expressive language is what comes out, right? So that is more visible. But many children with special needs also have receptive language problems. And there are certain special needs conditions which impacts, development in so many different areas, which ultimately also has its impact on language development. So the disorders, the different kinds of disorders that do affect speech and language development, which causes delay or deviancy in, acquiring speech and language skills, are one very commonly seen speech and language impacted disorder is hearing impairment. Again, varying degrees of hearing impairment definitely has its impact on speech and language development, because receptive language develops through hearing, right? Listening skills. And it is through hearing and listening that ultimately children learn the words or learn the sounds and learn the the use of language, and then only the expressive language comes forth. So when in children with hearing impairment, when they already the receptive language is affected, naturally the output or the expressive language will also be affected. Global developmental delay, or especially in the younger stages, we call it global developmental delay, which is like they have a delay in all areas of child development. It will be there in the gross and fine motor skills, social skills, speech and language, cognitive skills, etc., which ultimately usually leads to intellectual disability as well. So GDD or ID, again, it impacts all the areas, including speech and language development. And in conditions like GDD and ID, because all the other domains are also affected, concurrently, speech and language will also be affected. Autism spectrum disorders, again, in ASD, what happens is the primary breakdowns or the primary challenges are in the social interaction and communication. So when social skill development being such an important part of language development, when both these, when social skill interaction is impaired, naturally language development, the receptive language development will be impaired, and as well as the expressive language. So you find in ASD children with ASD, you find a lot of communication difficulties, speech and language difficulties. Some of them go to the point of being even totally non-verbal. CP or cerebral palsy. Again, it is a disorder which involves the muscular system. Therefore, CP can also exist because of the, it can affect all different kinds, not only the limbs, but also your oral motor muscles. So when CP affects these areas, obviously speech production, sound production, etc. gets affected. In conditions such as ASD and cerebral palsy, you also have children who have, intellectual with ID. So you can have ASD with ID or cerebral palsy with ID and so on. All these conditions, or sometimes you can have multiple disabilities where you can have, say, hearing impairment with ID and so on. So when you have all these kinds of varying disorders and disability conditions, definitely more than one domain is affected, and therefore it has its impact even in the speech and language area. Specific learning disorder. Specific learning disorder is slightly different from the other disorders because here the cognitive, at least the general intellectual functioning is intact. And, here many of them may develop functional speech. So it is not very easy to pick up on their speech and language deficits. There might be a mild delay, which is usually seen in some of the children, although not in all. But children with SLD, you see more of the fluency issues or vocabulary development, poor vocabulary, pronunciation issues, and so on. It's less of language and more of speech-related issues. However, even in children with SLD, you find receptive language issues such as being able to process and follow directions, etc. accurately. So delay or deviancy in speech and language, ultimately, doesn't matter what the condition is or all the challenges they pose. Ultimately, they do affect speaking and listening skills. And if they affect speaking and listening skills, it obviously has an adverse effect in acquiring literacy and numeracy skills as well. So what are some of those challenges we see? There is, in all these, the earlier mentioned special needs conditions, in varying degrees, you find a delay or deviancy in their sensory motor development. So whether you say, hearing impairment, for example, if a child has hearing impairment, definitely, the auditory modality of learning is impaired. And therefore, there in itself, there is an imbalance in the way the child develops. So there is a, if you talk about global developmental delay, IED, all these ASD, in all these areas, some kind of sensory motor delay or deviancy is usually seen. They also many of them also display weak cognitive processing skills. And this is true even in children with SLD. They do have difficulties with cognitive processing, and definitely in the other disorders, they do have problem with, whether it is attention, whether it is perception, whether it is thinking, whether it is, memory, all these cognitive skills that we talked about in the earlier workshops, these may be impaired or affected in different ways. Poor attention and concentration, again, has a direct bearing on what you receive, on the information you receive, as well as on the information that you communicate or put out. Below average intellectual functioning, to understand the world around you, to be able to recognize the situations when you need to respond and how to respond. All this requires a certain level of intellectual functioning, which again, if that is impaired in children, definitely that will have an impact in their speech and language development and speech and language skills. Let's say they are, reasonably good speech and language development has taken place, intellectual development is not too impaired and all that. They may still have, limited vocabulary. So the usage of words according to their situations may be very, very limited. And in some, if the disabilities or the disorders involve cognitive functioning or intellectual functioning, then definitely it's more severe. But even in children who have average or above average intelligence, who have conditions such as SLD, you find their vocabulary may be very limited. Or even children who have no intellectual impairment but only hearing impairment, they may be impacted because of poor vocabulary. And this was very evident, especially when it comes to their academics. You will see the usage of words that they use for reading, writing, expressing themselves in expressive writing, etc., will be limited. Poor use of grammar, picking up the grammar rules, being able to use, to form sentences accurately, the correct structure of or the word order in sentences, all this may be affected in children. Some of them may also have a poor clarity of speech. So the speech may be unclear. There may be several sounds that they may be mispronouncing. So for example, there may be certain sounds that they completely substitute. Instead of r, they may say l. So, so instead of saying, land, river, they may say liver. So, there are such kind of substitutions, or sometimes difficult sounds may be omitted. That is also possible. Sometimes, in words like, say, frog, for example, where two sounds are blended together, they may have difficulty in pronouncing these kind of sounds. So a wide variety of articulation or pronunciation problems, and ultimately speech problems clarity of speech can be affected because of that. Poor fluency. Some of them may speak, the rate of and accuracy with which they speak may be affected. Some may speak too fast, too slow, or sometimes, their speech is, not flowing, it's halted. So again, poor fluency can also can also hamper effective communication. So when we know that these are all the different kinds of, difficulties or challenges children with special needs may have, we need to look at what are the strategies and techniques that we can teach, especially when we come to teaching English as a language, when we provide English as a medium of instruction in schools. And when we talk about inclusive schools, we'll have a wide range of children with diverse kind of conditions coming into our classrooms. So just to, a general overview or an umbrella of the strategies that we can use, since we know how child speech and language development takes place and what is necessary for good speech and language development, you try to provide those kind of activities within your school settings, or when you're teaching any language for that matter, but especially if you're teaching the language which will be the medium of instruction in school. So you can have to stimulate and provide activities that will enhance or boost up sensory motor skills, both the gross and fine motor skills, social skills, communication skills, which involves both the receptive language as well as expressive language. And then because we are talking about inclusive schools and education and formal academic setting, they would also need remedial or supportive education side by side. And for this, we need to understand what is the child's current level of functioning, where, at what stage the child is at, what are the skills, the strengths that they have, and then what are the challenges or barriers that they have to, or what are the deficits that they have in acquiring age-appropriate skills. And according to that, we might have to customize our learning objectives, our learning activities to suit, to help, enhance whatever deficits are there and bring them back and help them catch up with the other children who are their peer group, or to develop more age-appropriate skills. So how do we, since I've given you a broad idea about, what strategies to use, can you just give some ideas on how to promote language development? I would like the participants to come forth and give me ideas on, how do you think language can be developed? And please do also think about in terms of receptive language.
Using play as a medium, art and craft stories, create neat storytelling, picture description, group activities, role playing, drama, associated learning, flashcard learning, interaction and communication, exposure to the environment, pictorial reading, using puppets, group activities, interactive sessions, music, art and movement, simulations, using objects, auditory activities, following direction, show and tell, speaking time, dictionary skills, storytelling, role playing, imitating sounds. These are the major ones.
Yeah, I think it's been a very, very exhaustive list. They've talked about a lot of different activities, and it's nice to see that people are actually thinking in that direction. So to promote English language development, we need to focus on just for academic purposes, a lot of these are intertwined again, because when you do one activity, you will have to work simultaneously on all these different skills. But just for us to understand, two big cornerstones of promoting language development in an academic setting. One is we need to work on listening and speaking skills, and then reading and writing skills, which is prominently known as LSRW skills. And this forms the basis of literacy and numeracy skills from in early schooling. So what do we have to do to develop speaking and listening skills? First and foremost is do lots of talking together. So whether it is, in the early stages, it must be the parents and the people in the home environment. But once they come into school, definitely, like a lot of you already mentioned, have group discussions, have children talk to each other, the teacher talking to the students, students talking back to the teacher, having, creating activities which involves a lot of talking together and carrying on conversations. And when we do this, talk about things which will be actually of interest to the children. So, choose topics which are age appropriate, choose topics which will appeal to the children so that that will promote better student engagement. If students are not actively engaged, then they may not participate in this so-called talking together. So it is very important to look at what motivates them and then use those kind of topics. And that's why you'll find in preschool, a lot of times people use toys, or like many of you said, puppets, animals, cartoons, all these things to start conversations, because these are some of the things that appeal to a lot of children at this age. Quite often, when children speak, even listening to them speak, you get a lead on, what really interests them. Even as babies, if you talk to the caregivers, you will understand that caregivers, quite often parents are able to tell you, oh, my child is interested in such and such a thing. Because even when they were babies, even when they couldn't speak a word, before that itself, they would show their preference by cooing or gurgling, or by using simple words, or even by the response they give to certain sounds, certain kinds of music, etc. That that these children have a preference for certain things. I've actually personally worked with children who have ASD, who do have a particular preference for particular kinds of music. So many of them I've worked with have had a strong inclination or strong liking for classical music, and especially if they've grown up in a house which had a lot of classical music going on. There were even, like in the Indian form of classical music, we have something called rag, which is like a particular kind of a certain set of notes in a particular kind, arranged in a particular way. And there were certain kids who would identify, or who would have a preference for songs or music composed in a particular kind of rag, or with a certain kind of note configuration. So, follow the child's lead, take information from caregivers, etc., to understand what really interests the child. So this can help educators, to use as conversation starters. and to plan activities around it. Tips to remember when you're talking to the child is, treat the child as an equal. Never try not to talk down to the child. So first and foremost, maintain eye contact, and preferably maintain eye contact at the same level or very close. When somebody is standing up and if the child is way down below, a really young child, very short, and then you look down, rather than that, that doesn't build a good social interaction or social bonding, which is necessary for language development. So for being an effective communicator, look into the child's eyes so the child reciprocates. So get down to the level of the child. That is very important. And even if they are, a lot of times we do find when children are trying to say something, they're sometimes brushed aside or enough attention is not given by the grown up to them. So avoid that, treat them as an equal and treat them as what they're saying is important. And give them due respect when they're speaking. And if you're talking to the child, when you finish talking, give them a turn, wait for their response, give them time to respond to you. Don't rush them up. And this is particularly true of children with special needs. You sometimes need to give them more time because they take time to process what you have said. So, giving them adequate time is very, very important. Responding to the child, whenever the child is doing something, either maybe if the child is just at the stage of, just one word utterances, try to attach meanings to those one word utterances. So you can try and extend if the child just says apple, you can kind of extend the meaning of it saying, okay, do you want the apple? Do you like apple? And so on. So attach a certain kind of communicative meaning to a particular action or a particular utterance. Even if the child is reaching for an object, if the baby is reaching for an object, normally you find very automatically adults ask, oh, do you want this? Here it is, take it, and give the toy to the child. So here what the adult is effectively doing is communicating to the child that, the action has a communicative intent. So the child learns to, replicate those actions for the purpose of communication later on. So attach communicative meanings to the child's actions, use gestures to respond to your child. If the child is showing, putting hand out for no, or, nodding their head or showing some kind of gestures, add a word to that so that, the child learns that the gesture word association can be used for communicating. So because again, effective communication is a combination of both, gestures as well as verbal utterances. So again, provide these kind of examples, good modeling examples to the child. Repeat and expand upon what the child has said. And this is again very important for children with special needs, because when the children, many of our children have very limited utterance. So even if they say something, as I said earlier, if they just say one word or two words, try to extend the meaning of those words. Or even if they say a small basic sentence, try to expand that sentence to add more details to it. So the child realizes that, by adding more words, you can make yourself understood more, in a better fashion. So, for example, if you see a red toy lying on the floor and the child just says red toy, so you can say, oh, the red toy is on the floor. Shall we pick it up? So add more and more details, words, vocabulary, intent, communicative intent, and provide these kind of live examples to the child so that it gets into the receptive language system and ultimately comes out as expressive language as well. Everyday talking, even not just babies or young children, but even, for teenagers, children who are, adolescents, it's very, very important to do everyday talking with your children. Talk about the different kinds of happenings through the school day. Talk about things that you do. Meal times, at the dinner table is a very good time to start talking about topics. And, again, don't be dictatorial, autocratic, but include them in conversations. Talk about topics they too will be interested in. Build a kind of bonding with the children. Again, social bonding is very, very important for being effective communicators. And this is not just to build a healthy family setup, but these kind of skills are also important in their schools, in their colleges, later on when they go into the, to the workplace. Being an effective communicator, being able to interact socially and communicate effectively are very, very important skills which is necessary. And all these things ultimately, not only it promotes their social well-being, their psychological and emotional well-being, but also helps the ultimately, when we talk about schooling, even in academic development. Reading to the child and with the child. So you can read stories to the child even as young as 6 to 8 months. The moment the child can be placed in your lap in a sitting position, you can show picture books and talk to the children about it. It's a good way of introducing love of books for one. And also a lot of things can be explained, taught, word usage, all these can be. And it's a fun time, it's a fun shared joint bonding time with the caregivers. So all these things take place when you read to the child and with the child. You can help the child link all the events in the story that you're reading or in the book that you're reading with something that they've seen in their environment or what they have experienced. So again, to understand that academic learning has a lot of times children nowadays think that academic learning has nothing to do with what they have in real life. So again, connecting the books to real life experiences can be done through speaking and listening activities. Again, as everybody said, play, both indoor activities as well as outdoor. It helps in fostering a lot of skills, social skills, communicative skills, understanding, following directions. Even if you're angry, for example, if you don't like something that has happened, but using language in an effective manner, like exercising self-control and self-restraint and bringing your expressive language to more acceptable usage. All these things develop through play activities, and both indoor and outdoor play activities also contribute very positively towards speaking and listening skills. And then, of course, as I said, their impact on, reading and writing. Speech and language skills form the basis of speaking and listening skills, which ultimately facilitate and refines the reading and writing process as well. And the development of literacy skills are paramount to any kind of academic learning. So because understanding to the literacy and numeracy skills are the ones that help children to decode, to think about the different things that they experience in the environment, learn in school, to assimilate new ideas, to comprehend new concepts, to be able to express their emotions in a socially appropriate, age appropriate manner, or in environmental appropriate manner. So all these things can be facilitated through speech and language activities and activities which promote these. So literacy skills and their importance, it goes without saying that speaking, listening, reading, and writing forms the basic, the crux of academic subject content. In the only difference is in the early years, you're learning to read, to listen, to speak, to read, and to write, so that later on years, you can use those skills to learn more subject content matter. So obviously, good LSRW skills lays the foundation for good academic performance, which ultimately has a bearing on better work opportunities, better employment, and enhancing the kind of goes without saying that better education will result in better employment and work opportunities. So coming down to special needs, we talked about education, the impact of listening and speaking skills. But when we talk about children with special needs, it's not just listening and speaking skills and those activities that are required. We also talked about how in inclusive school settings, they would need remedial or supportive education. So I would like participants to, come forth with why do they think this is necessary? Why is remedial or supportive education necessary? What is the need for that?
So Ms. Goma says to bridge the gap. Ms. Majorine Linkopi says for improvement, to assist the child, to understand what level the child is performing, to increase your reading speed, build relationship, to help them perform, to grow their social interaction, to help them more individualize and customize their learning, to make them more inclusive, to support in an area where the child is lacking, to make the child self-reliant, enhance their hidden qualities, promote personal growth, help them retain the learning, fill up the gaps, to boost their confidence and build their social skills, to identify their strength and help in the development of it, to accelerate the development of their skills, facilitate academic performance.
Okay, I think they've kind of touched upon every aspect of it. So thank you to all the participants for such excellent coverage of, why we need remedial or supportive education. As everyone's, some of you have mentioned, yes, to bridge the gaps between what the current level of functioning of the child is and what is the expected level of performance according to grade level. So we know that children with special needs do have these gaps, and therefore those gaps need to be bridged so that they can perform as close as possible to grade level requirements. To teach the core skills which are required for acquiring foundational literacy and numeracy skills. Because if foundational literacy and numeracy is not acquired, that will definitely have a snowball or a ripple effect on higher order academic skills. So the early schooling years, the primary schooling, the preschool and the primary schooling years is when the foundational literacy numeracy skills are developed. And if supportive or remedial education is not provided at that time and they miss out on, the foundational skills, or they go up to higher grades with weak foundational skills, then obviously it becomes all the more difficult for them to acquire the subject matter or the content matter, which really increases after the primary level into middle school and high school. Content matter really increases, subjects become more and more complicated. And if they're unable to listen, speak, read, write, do basic math, definitely all that will have an adverse impact on their higher order schooling years. So yes, remedial education or supportive education is needed for all these. To support the child in not only enhancing the skills that they're deficient in or in the concepts that they're deficient in and meet their challenges and deficits, to help the child become an active learner in school and promote self-confidence and psychological well-being. Because with a lot of children, we find that when you intervene early and give them the right kind of remedial or supportive education, they become more active learners. The gaps are bridged much better. Their self-confidence and overall, emotional and psychological well-being is better. And when they are better rounded, more holistically, better rounded personalities, they end up becoming better learners for life. So again, very important for that. And as the participants already mentioned, all these finally it culminates in to enable better inclusion, not only in the school, but also later on in society. So for all this, remedial or supportive education is absolutely necessary. And strategies for, when we talk about English language remediation, some of the strategies that are required. Since you've come up with such wonderful ideas, please, come up with more remediation strategies that would help in promoting English language skills in children.
So reading together with the child, reading out aloud, music phonics, playgroups, social stories, using a lot of TLMs in terms of videos, movies, storytelling, asking questions to the child, show and tell activities, Echo reading, speech and drama, connecting with day-to-day life, role playing, playing and acting together with the child, engage the child in small talk, showing informative videos, building vocabulary through flashcards, modeling, story time, one-on-one conversation, shared reading, compare and contrast questions, word games, flashcards, tracking techniques, reasoning and thinking concepts, listening to music, interactive games, read aloud, flashcard, same component, repetition of the sequence.
Yeah. Okay, so I think again, a very thank you to the participants for bringing out such an exhaustive list. You've touched upon most of these things. So one of the key things that I would just add to that is early identification. Early identification is very, very important as early as possible, because the earlier you identify, the earlier you can provide the stimulatory activities. And if in cases of where an established disability or disorder exists, you can provide the right kind of intervention. So being, you don't have to wait until delay sets in. Pay attention to early red flag indicators and address them. So in many of these conditions, as I said, if you understand what normal or neurotypical child development is, then anything that is not happening in an age appropriate fashion is a red flag signal. So pay attention to those red flag indicators and get help as early as possible. The earlier you get help, the earlier you can provide the requisite amount of support, and you can bridge those, the delays and gaps that form later on. The more delayed you identify, the gaps tend to widen. So to be more effective, to provide services and to promote better well-being of the child, early identification, stimulation or intervention is necessary. Use a variety of TLMs, which already people have mentioned, variety of teaching learning materials, different kinds of activities, stimulating the different kinds of senses. So use visual activities, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, all the different modalities, stimulate all the different sensory modalities. So use TLMs which match those, or activities which match those. Use appropriate play and other kind of TLMs, which will go with, tie in with whatever lesson or concepts you're teaching. So, include, like many of you said, rhymes, games, stories, role play, drama, music and dance. All these activities do help. Apart from that, teach in a sequential order. Very, very important. So whenever we are talking about language teaching, target the speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills explicitly in a sequential manner. So we need to understand that, one follows the other. Like we've seen in the what happens in language development. It is one thing leading to the other and getting more and more refined and sophisticated as the child moves in through those stages. So similarly, when you teach, when you provide remedial education, also teach these skills in a very, very sequential manner. Additional strategies, like you mentioned, from the activities that you mentioned, it is evident, use multifarious activities. But a lot of times, because children have these special needs conditions that I mentioned earlier, such as hearing impairment or global developmental delay, intellectual disability, ASD, SLD, and so on, you might need input from multidisciplinary professionals as well. You might need the help of an occupational therapist or a speech and language therapist, or maybe a physiotherapist, because their input can also help further in whatever supportive education you're incorporating. So a lot of times, especially if they're attending other therapies, you can incorporate those therapy goals and objectives into your learning activities. So that will provide an additional boost to whatever education they're getting in school. Flexible grouping. So again, people did talk about, small groups and group discussions and all that. So whatever you're teaching or the learning activities that are taking place, you can have as individual one-on-one, or in a large group, or in small groups within a classroom, large a group classroom and so on. So be flexible with the grouping. Behavior management, again, very important. Provide the right kind of impetus or reinforcement or reward systems for promoting positive behaviors, so that it enhances and improves their adaptive behavior in the school setting and in the beyond the school setting. So some of these also add on and are vital parts which ultimately forms in promoting a better teaching learning process in the school system. So coming to an end, to a wrap of this session, what we looked at today was, how English language as a medium of instruction in schools is heavily dependent on, age appropriate speech and language development in children. So if there are children who have challenges and special needs conditions, then early identification of these challenges is absolutely essential, so that intervention or early stimulation can be provided as early as possible. Milestones of these language, the aim to identify as early as possible is so that the milestones of these language development can be met and the child can be retracked into the process of in the process of the normal child development pattern, and to minimize the effects of challenges or the deficit skills. And then last but not the least, parent-teacher interaction, social interaction with the child actually maximizes the development of language skills, which ultimately has a positive impact on the acquisition of academic skills in school. So we come to an end of this session, and so I'm now open for a quick Q&A. So.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for an informative session. Thank you for simplifying it to all of us and also connecting it to the larger perspective. We had a lot to learn from you today. Before we begin with our Q&A session for today, I'd like to take the participants through a few things. We have our upcoming events on the academic intervention module, which will be focusing on developing listening and speaking skills in children with special needs, which will be happening on the 21st of December at 4 p.m. Indian time, 5:30 p.m. Indonesian time, and 6:30 p.m. Philippines and Singapore time. This will be conducted by Madam Geetha Gopi N. Following this, we'll have another event which will be happening next year in the month of January on the 6th, which should focus on phonological awareness and sight word recognition to improve reading fluency in children with special needs. This would be happening at 4:30 p.m. Indian time, 6 p.m. Indonesian time, and 7 p.m. Singapore and Philippines time. We'll be sharing the link in some time in the chat box. Do share the link with anyone and ask them to register and book your slot to attend these events. Now I'll be taking you through the platform. I'm going to show you how is that you can register for the event and what are the different provisions that are available. To register for any event, all you have to do is log into your Ability account and click on any event that is of interest to you and click on register for this event button. Following this, you will be able to submit your question to the speaker directly, and the question that gets the most upvote would be the one that would be prioritized by the speaker. Not only this, as part of each event that you attend with Ability, you'd also be receiving certain resources that are relevant for you to practice with your children in respective setting. For the current event, we have prepared a list of resources which will also be shared with you all during the meeting. And also don't forget to review the resources and rate them and let us know what you feel about it. And also share these resources with anyone who you think would benefit from them over any social media platform. Finally, you'll also be able to find all the related events in the related events tab and get a track of all the events that you've attended with Ability on my events section here. Now, I'm happy to introduce you all to our events takeaway platform. This is a one place to get an access to all the details with that of your slides, your documents, resources for any workshop that you attend with Ability, the link for which is being shared right now in the chat box. And for all of you, those who are looking for the recording of the event, this will also be uploaded in this page after 2 to 3 days of the live event. From the same page, you'll also be able to register for upcoming events and also access all the resources that are being prepared for each of the events. Do share this link with anyone who you think would benefit from the event. And with this, we'll be able to impact more life and help children with special needs better. Now, if you are a resource creator and have been creating resources to help children with special needs, this is a platform for you. You can become an ability resource creator, create your profile inside Ability, and upload the resources that you've created or curated for children with special needs and share it with our community members with over 40,000 educators and parents, and get live feedback and responses from them to build your profile. If you're interested for this, the link for which is also being shared right now in the chat box. Do register your interest. Our team members will get in touch with you. Geetha ma'am, do I have you with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we start with the Q&A for today, ma'am?
Sure.
Yeah. The first question is from Miss Vivian Flores, who wants to know that what is the need or significance of English language in today's age, especially for children with special needs?
This is quite a contentious question. It depends again on the level of challenges a child has. Many of the parents are interested in their children going through the English medium of instruction, even if that is not their native, their native, even if they're not native speakers. And that's because in many of the countries, particularly in countries like India or many of the Asian countries, a higher education, a lot of times it's in English. And because the world has shrunk so much, there's so much of globalization going on. English is seen as a more effective medium to communicate with the world at large. So that is why a lot of parents do feel that, their child with special needs should not miss out on learning English. But having said that, again, it depends on the child, how, if, as I said, it's not just one factor. It is what is the kind of special needs condition they have, whether intellectual functioning is, average, above average, or it is significantly affected. Whether depends on which environment the child is coming from and how much utility going through an English medium education will have for the child, not just in the present environment, but also in future environments. So depending on that, I think it is important for the parents to take a call on whether they really need, to use English as a medium of instruction. Because we do find a large number of children do pick up English. The positive, I would say, is even if it is not their native tongue, a lot of times English is easier to pick up because a lot of the written language, the reading and writing language is very similar to what is spoken. Whereas in many of the, I know I can speak with authority on many of the Indian languages, the vernacular languages, what happens is the reading, writing language is not always what is the spoken language. The dialects may differ, the vocabulary may differ, and so on. So children might find a disconnect between the two. But again, it is important to understand the level of the child, the intellectual capability of the child, etc., before you introduce English, which is not their native language. But again, there's no hard and fast rule. We do find a good number of children do pick up English very well. In fact, they tend to pick up English better than their native tongues. And also in certain kinds of disorders, sometimes, it becomes difficult when too many languages are there. And I know in multilingual countries like India, this is a big problem when you have to learn 2-3 languages. So sometimes parents, because of the challenges their children have, they have to narrow it down to one particular language or maybe 2 languages at best. So then they are faced, with the thing that they have to choose. What would they prefer? And again, as I said, it's academic learning. Ultimately, it is leading to job opportunities and all that. So keeping a longer vision in mind and the child's level, what the child's diagnosis is or the current level of functioning, where the child is able to go. I think based on that, it is important to realize whether you need to insist on English as a medium of instruction or otherwise.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us and for connecting us to the larger picture. Next, we have a similar question from Ms. Asha Sharma, who wants to know what is the minimum basic English language that children with special needs have to develop adequately to survive and meet with your needs and requirements.
This is a very subjective kind of thing. See, it depends, and again, as I said, on the child. Okay, the minimum level of English, we would like our children to, learn at least basic reading and writing. Okay, be able to read a newspaper or a, ultimate goal and comprehend that, or be able to write a little paragraph or a little, a letter by themselves and so on. Depending on how language is used, in everyday life. Do a drop, send an email and so on. But having said that, not all children may be able to achieve those kind of skills. So our aim is, depending on the child, according to the level of the child, take them through that process, and whatever is possible, to whatever highest level is possible for each individual child, try to make them achieve that much of, to the maximum of whatever potential they have. So that is what I look at. Because we do know, like, if you look at children with intellectual disability, for example, if you expect them to do, very abstract level of literature, reading, comprehension, or writing, they may not, come up to that level. But at least if they have some, if you identify them early and give them basic reading level, reading and writing, the kind of jobs they could be employed in would be far better. So again, as I said, it is very, you have to view it as a lifespan approach with a longer vision. So as much as possible is that the child can go, take the child that far. So that is the explanation I can give. There is no real benchmark standard there.
Making the child functional is more about it. Next, we have a question from Mr. Joseph, who wants to know what are the limits to teachability, especially in severe cases, and when is that we will be able to demarcate of additional professional help is needed, because you also mentioned about interdisciplinary team. So when is that teachers can know that, okay, this is the level to which the child can perform, now an expert supervision or advice would be needed?
See, if there is, what teachers have to understand is, if there are deficits in speaking and listening skills, if you are doing all the different kinds of activities and everything, say about, we normally call it response to intervention. So say about 6 months, you've tried everything possible and the child has shown some improvement, but still is not catching up. So then, definitely you need more input, or the child needs more, therapeutic input. So that is one of the, I would say, you have to refer to a professional. If right from before this child enters school itself, there has been a history of a delay in development in other areas or in speech and language, then obviously you need to get that information from the parents. So if there has been a delay and they have already been, consulting therapists or other professionals, so get the parents on board and, get the information on what is being, what services are being provided, so that you can incorporate those kind of things into your learning objectives, learning teaching activities. Again, there's, but if you have a blank slate, like you have no information prior, the child has just entered school, everything has been okay, but you find things are not working out, then give 6 months time for the child to settle in the grade level and see. Otherwise, going back to the history would help. And sometimes you find some children would have had a delay, but the parents would not have addressed it. They might have just let it slide, thinking, oh, the child will develop speech and language as the time goes on, they will catch up. And the child may not have caught up. So again, get the complete information about the child. and then decide, what to do.
So getting the complete case history and also 6-month period of continuous intervention to see if there is any progress is the way to actually approach the situation. Next, we have a question from Mr. Ken Chon, Yorton, who wants to know, is there any technique or a tool that is there to determine the current English language proficiency level in children?
There are a lot of ways, and I think English language proficiency, there are many of these checklists, especially if you look at early development, there are a lot of, preschool kind of checklists, early childhood checklists that are available. I think more will be dealt with this in the following workshop. So there are such checklists. In addition to that, once the child enters school, if you look at most of the school textbooks, if you're teaching English, if you look at the English textbooks, most of the school textbooks will have a list of skills that the children are required to acquire by the end of that particular lesson, or by the end of that particular unit that they're going to have. So using that as an indicator will really help in where the child is and what else do you have to do to, and where you want to take the child to ultimately. So these are kind of, roughly use the curriculum as an indicator, or if the child is too young, then use the, what I said, the normal child, neurotypical child development pattern as an indicator. I think if you use that, then okay, if the child is not performing age appropriately, if there's a delay or if there's a deviancy, that can be made out. And because speech and language is such a social functioning skill, you also get people around you to tell you, okay, maybe your child is not doing okay. You find others saying, why isn't your child speaking? Or even parents themselves begin to compare, like, so-and-so child in the my neighbor's child is same age and is doing all these things, but my child is not able to. So that gap becomes very easily visible. And usually parents are aware, but there is also a danger here that even if they are aware, there is also a tendency that people say, oh, even I've seen even medical doctors or the pediatricians who the parents first take the child to, they tend to say, oh, the child, don't worry, the child will develop by themselves. I would say don't take a chance. If you know there is a delay, it doesn't hurt to go to a professional. Because even if the child doesn't have a disorder, if there is still a delay, that can cause gaps in learning. So, if there is a gap, then you can address it as early as possible, which means there will be no further delays. Whatever further delays or gaps that might occur can be minimized.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So going with the curriculum for children is the way, and for younger children, understanding their level, like month-wise or age-wise, and understanding the milestones that they have met is the key to go about it. Next, we have a question from Mr. Jamway, who wants to know, what is the role and importance of mother tongue in the development of other language proficiency, especially English language? Is there any link or role between both of that?
Well, there is a lot of research that has contributed to this. And, they do say that, your native tongue is what, again, it's like laying a foundation of language development. Your native tongue is very, very important. And if you know your native tongue, then it is easier to connect to another language. To an English language. I've, in my last 30 years, I've taught mostly children who are not native English speaking children. And I've taught English to these children. And I find that, especially when you're, knowing their native language actually enhances, because see, the processing that is involved in language is the same for all languages, right? The cognitive processing, the social skills. What might change is according to the nuances of the language, the way the words are used in a sentence, or those kind of things, the structure of the sentence, the grammar, the kind of vocabulary used, the kind of body language or gestures, that may be a bit culture specific or language specific. those might vary, but the neurological processes that take place or the sensory motor development, that is uniform throughout all over the world. So knowing your mother tongue is definitely one step, on which you can, put a thrust on to learn another language. Because even if you think about us adults, if you've gone to a new place and we are trying to learn a new language, what we're usually trying to do is trying to connect, right? From the, okay, if you use the word apple for apple in English, or some other language, then you try to connect the word apple to that object, using your mother tongue as from a known factor. So always, in any education, in any learning, and particularly in special education, we always say proceed from the known to the unknown. So knowing your mother tongue is definitely a very good, a springboard on which the other language can be learned. And this is true vice versa as well. For native English speakers, if they know their native tongue well, it is useful for the, it becomes very useful and handy when they learn a second language.
Wonderful insights, ma'am. Now, there's an additional question to the current question that's from Mr. Vikrama Ratna, who wants to know how is that the early, for example, for children who have learned their mother tongue, when is that we can introduce English language to them? Is there any age or is there any way to approach this situation?
It depends on the environment. If the child is growing up in an environment where there is a lot of English being spoken, it can be introduced as early as possible. I mean, there are a lot of families which are bilingual, and coming from a country like India, where English is also, especially in the urban setup, where the mother tongue and English are spoken almost interchangeably. Or you use a lot of English words in your normal everyday conversation, even when you're speaking in your mother tongue, is very, very common in our natural environment. So it depends on the environment of the child. If English is being introduced at an early age, fine, because as we said, the biggest spurt of language acquisition happens in early childhood. So unless a child has a specific difficulty learning a particular language, even if you introduce it early enough, that's no issues. The child will pick it up. But again, with special needs children, depending on the condition they have, it might be wiser to start off with one language, and when they are a bit comfortable, then introduce the other. Or, as I said, with some of the children, we do teach them interchangeably, because that's a lot of times that's how we speak as well. And I belong to a part of India called Kerala, where, even in a normal conversation, in one sentence, you might have, even if I'm speaking in my native tongue, there might be 2 or 3 English words thrown in, which has become part of normal conversation now. So it doesn't hurt to use it like that. Because again, as I said, speaking and listening skills, the ultimate purpose is communication, right? So it doesn't matter how, if you are becoming an effective communicator, because I'm not very proficient, especially if it comes to, say, if I have to conduct a webinar. If you ask me to conduct it in my mother tongue, I can speak, casually, but if you ask me to conduct a very, professional workshop like this in my native tongue, I will not be able to do it. But I can definitely communicate to an audience like that, because I can use my native mother tongue as well as, a healthy mix of English and my native tongue, so that, I can communicate effectively what I want to say. So ultimately, again, what is important is being an effective communicator, and it doesn't matter what language it is in. The only problem is, when and how you introduce, especially when they have, certain issues which are very specific to speech and language, especially children with ASD or children with hearing impairment, so that sometimes they do get confused when 2 or more languages are introduced. But I have, on the other hand, I've seen children like, I've seen children, plenty of children with ASD, for example, who use English in school and who use Malayalam or, their native tongue when at home. They seem to switch that, even despite all the special needs conditions they have, they seem to do that very effectively. So, why limit a child? If they're able to do it, fine, let them, experience both. Because again, a lot of research has gone into that. If you are, the more languages you know, the better, your intellectual processing and functioning and understanding of concepts and all that. So again, that can contribute, to better academic learning.
Wonderful insights, ma'am. And thank you for showing and throwing light on the importance of early intervention per se, and also how customizing to each child, because it cannot be generalized for every child. So depending on the child's requirement, the time to introduce languages will be very dependent on it. As we're talking about the importance of early intervention and on those lines, there's a question from Ms. Ibrahim Ismail, who wants to know, there's a lot of research which mentions about the role of pregnancy in language development, and attending to the womb in the infant actually facilitates language development. So what is your take on it, and what is that you want to share about it now?
I'm not an expert in this area because this is more into the medical field and all that. All I know is from whatever little I've read on this topic and whatever my understanding goes, the right kind of language stimulation, just like after birth, the right kind of language stimulation, the social bonding with the child facilitates, more healthy child development. Similarly, even in the prenatal stages, this helps. And this is why, we most of the research do point to the fact that listening to music, especially, classical music or instrumental music, things which help, which are very calming and soothing, also helps, relax the mother. And through that, even the fetus or the child in the womb is also affected with the positive impacts of these things. Other than that, I am not, an expert in this area, but I would definitely recommend, if you're more interested in that area, to do more reading in that. For me, as an educator, a lot is not in the prenatal. That usually the medical professionals and those other kind of people who take care of those aspects. But what we do say, it's like common sense logic, that if the mother is healthy and she is exposed to more pleasing, more, more healthy social and emotional interactions, be it through music, be it through talking, through conversations, all this promotes better development within the womb also. More healthy development within the womb means more healthy development even after birth as well. So definitely, because all those things, all the processing and, all the neuronal development is taking place in the womb. So definitely providing a more positive environment will have its impact. But more specifics regarding that, well, all I know is it does have a positive impact, and therefore we try to provide a positive environment for, expectant mothers, which will definitely boost more positive development in the child. Having said that, there are studies, especially with music being, that really works to calm the fetus or to enable the fetus to respond in different ways. A lot of that, is still being researched currently, on this, and they're finding that, playing certain kinds of music helps promote better, it has a calming effect and a more soothing effect on the fetus as well, and therefore it promotes more healthy environment. And that goes true even after birth, actually. With a lot of these kids, we have found music plays a very, very important role. And even in the educational settings, using a lot of music, dance, movement, rhythm, all these contribute towards good speech and language development.
Thank you for throwing light, ma'am, and connecting how prenatal and postnatal and child development is all connected. There are more researches on similar lines. People who are interested can definitely check them out. Next, we have a question from Mr. Khalid Ibrahim, who wants to know, to what extent is early diagnosis effective in child's future language acquisition? And why is that we always keep emphasizing on early diagnosis? If you can share the importance of it and along with the repercussions on what would happen if it is not done, that will be helpful to our members here.
Early development, see, again, it's a very common sense logic. If you have an illness, if it is the early stages of that illness, there are better chances of managing it well. Better chances that it will not impact the other systems in your body, right? So it is similar with, early identification of neurodevelopmental disabilities. Again, we call many of these special needs conditions as neurodevelopmental disabilities. The greatest amount of neuronal development, although it takes place throughout life, but the greatest amount takes place in childhood years. And when we say developmental or childhood years, it is from 0 to 18 years. But the biggest impetus, as I said again, the biggest spurt you see in the 0 to 3 and then 3 to 6 years. A good part of the neurological development, the neuronal connections, which are responsible for cognitive processing and therefore, developmental skill development in all different areas and contributing to holistic child development. All this, the biggest spurt is happening in the early childhood times. So when you identify right there, the neuronal development is what we say as, is more plastic. It's more moldable. It's more, when you intervene, it may have gone a little bit astray from the normal track of development, but it's easier to put it back on track and bring it to the mainstream track because the additional problems would not have developed. So that is why we insist that the earlier you identify, and when I say identify, I'm not saying diagnose. There's a difference. When we say identify, we are looking at the red flag indicators, seeing what the child is having difficulty with and providing support or stimulation for that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a diagnostic label. It is just to understand, okay, is the child on track? If not, what can be done to put the child back on track? So that is why early identification is important, because at that stage, that is the most influential age. At that stage, the child is still developing. So therefore, if the child's development has been delayed or there is a slight deviation, you can bring it back on track. It's more easier to do it. Also, when you leave it unattended, any kind of special needs situation, what happens is as the child grows, the gaps between what the child should have at a particular age and what the child has, the child's current level of functioning, the gaps tend to widen. Because of the neurodevelopmental disorder or the child has, the child is not acquiring it automatically like other neurotypical children. So therefore, to assume that it will happen automatically is a fallacy. So we have to give certain kinds of support or remediation or therapy or something to boost that. Or sometimes it may just be stimulatory, extra stimulatory activities from what is being normally given in the environment to help the child catch up and bridge that delay or deviance. So that is why acting early is important. And if you don't act early, as I said, it impacts social development, it impacts emotional development. So it's not just impacting one area. A lot of secondary issues will crop up when you delay giving the intervention or the support, later on. Because even in cases where, where you say, I would take the case of specific learning disorder, which is the most difficult to pick up on compared to other disorders. And usually that is identified much later than what is necessary. Even in SLD, the earlier if you leave it unattended, they end up having more emotional problems, self-confidence issues, attitude issues, which ultimately, more than their lack of academics, these are the factors which ultimately affect not only their academic learning, but also their whole personality development. And this tends to have an impact throughout life. And therefore, good, what do we say, more effective inclusion is hampered in those cases. So for all these purposes, it is very important to act as early as possible. Don't leave it to chance or to, okay, the child, if the child had to pick up automatically, they would have done so, right? So obviously, if there is a delay, it means something is not happening that should have happened. So they may need a support or an extra stimulation for, catching up.
Very, very enlightening, ma'am. Thank you for actually emphasizing on it. Early intervention helps them put them back on track and also reduce the snowball effect that would come if you don't address that at the early years. Let me take the last few questions for today. We have another question from Mr. Ibrahim Ismail, who wants to know what are certain things that educators need to keep in mind while working with second generation learner who are being exposed to English language for the first time?
Can I have a bit of clarity on when we say second generation learner, you mean check second generation literacy?
Yes, ma'am. The first generation learners were exposed to the language for the first time, right? Yeah. And do not have support back at home to facilitate the development of this language. So what can be done in these cases?
Yes, this is a bit difficult, especially if they're coming from backgrounds which do not, where they do not have a lot of English language exposure. That does hamper a little bit of the language development. However, you can, do a lot of activities within school. You can even ask the parents, if possible, they can provide, nowadays, the mobile phone is very, and internet connections are so easily available. So if the parents can do that, you can give them, suitable websites or suitable TV programs, etc., where language development can be facilitated. The child can be exposed to more, of the English language. It depends on, again, the environmental thing. The parents themselves don't necessarily have to have an English speaking background. Even if they don't have, nowadays, you have a lot of the media which can, be used to give more language input in homes where English is not the major language. So that can definitely be used. You can also encourage children to have more peer group interactions. A child who is not possibly from a very English household can possibly have more interactions with, you can set up these kind of student interactions. Say over the weekend, they can visit their friend who comes from, say, a more English background. So have go to places like the playground or the parks, children's parks, where they can mingle with children who have, better English language skills. And all these things can be explored to further improve the amount of English language that can be provided to the child, to give the child more exposure. So it is basically how the child is exposed to it. It doesn't always have to be the parent or the home environment alone. Nowadays, especially with the audiovisual boom, the media boom, there's so many avenues that are available.
Thank you for sharing practical inputs on it, ma'am. With the technological advancement nowadays, exposure to different mediums is possible to facilitate development. Let's take the last question for today. This is from Ms. Maria, who wants to know who is the sound professional to diagnose children with speech or language disorders? Who is that parents have to take these children to?
It's a speech and language therapist, people who have done their bachelor's or master's in speech and language pathology and audiology. These are the, especially if it's speech and language issues, these are the people you go to. And even if they have fluency issues such as, stuttering or, those kind of issues also, especially if it is pertaining to receptive and expressive language, yes, these are the people you go to. But if it is purely academic, if functional speech is fine, if it's purely academic, then probably It is more of the special educator who needs to provide remedial or supportive education. But again, if the in certain cases, it might be the speech and language therapist along with the remedial or supportive special educator.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for clarifying that question. And as usual, we had a lot to learn from your Q&A discussion. Thank you so much for sharing and taking all these questions up. And thank you all participants for actively participating throughout today's session. Ma'am, your final words to all our participants today.
It's become almost very customary for me to say this, but it's a wonderful community you have there. And I love the way they respond, especially when I put out, asking them for suggestions and everything. So it just shows that they're very thorough professionals who are thinking professionals, basically, in their area, whichever area they're working in. And, a lot of those suggestions, which come out of the discussions, it gives me a good idea about how intently they are actually continuously working at themselves professionally, or observing whatever is happening within their classroom or the efforts that they're making in the teaching language process. So that is very heartening to have such a very responsive, actively engaged audience. So it makes my job easier. It also makes my job more fruitful because I too get a good reinforcement and then motivation, to speak to such enlightened audiences. So both ways, I think it works well. And as usual, ability, your support, whether it with regard to the team you have, the tech support that I get, and all that, definitely it's always been a fruitful association. So yeah. It's a very enlightening as well as a very fruitful association for me too.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The chat box is filled with words of gratitude for you. Dear participants, have seen that the feedback link has been shared with you all. I'll request my team member to again post the feedback link. Do take a moment out and let us know how effective this session was for you so that we'll be able to improve the experience for all of you all. And also, I'd like to remind you all, we have an upcoming session on addressing listening and speaking challenges in children with special needs, which would be happening on the 21st of December, 4 p.m. Indian time, 5:30 p.m. Indonesian time, and 6:30 p.m. Singapore and Philippine times. This session will be conducted by none other than Madam Geetha Gopi. Followed this, in the next year, we'd have the first session on the 6th of January, which would be focusing on the phonological awareness, sight word recognition to improve reading fluency in children with special needs, which would be happening on the 4:30 p.m. Indian time, 6 p.m. Indonesian time, and 7 p.m. Singapore and Philippine times. The registration link will be shared with you all. Do share this with anyone who you think would benefit from it, and book your slots to join us for all the academic intervention module. Until we see you for the next time, it's a big bye from Team Ability. Take care and stay safe, all of you.